Hey, yeah, this is a video response to Matt Squatch, and I didn't realize it, but I saw that you made some videos about how to kill a Sasquatch Part 1 and 2. It just so happens I was thinking along the same lines yesterday. It's like 1:30 in the morning here on 21st, and without seeing your videos, so there's some parallels, so I want to run past you and see what you think. Um, I watched a bunch of Dogman videos and stories and things like that. And there seems to be like a common thread. And I don't even like to call them dogmen, I like to call them lupines. I think it sounds a little more technical and, less hillbilly. But anyways, I want to get your thoughts on this. I tend to think analytically and to that extent in nature. And so I wrote some notes on, kind of like how to deal with aggressive Sasquatch or lupine species. And in particular, the Sasquatch, the more super aggressive carnivorous, like you said, the Wendigo, googly, or I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. But first and foremost, if you're an individual, um, less than 30 people attempting to go hunt these things down, you're an idiot. That's just really stupid. Um, as with anything else worth organizing, you need to develop intelligence. So basically, the best people that can do this is just probably the government and military. They have the resources, the money, the technology. They're ahead of us on this. If you think they aren't, that's incredibly naive and probably dangerous. So, on that, I want to point out that this is basically designed for what a lay person or regular person can do from limited budget, limited technology, limited resources. So the idea is to assemble a group of a minimal of 30 to 40 people if, and this is all war theory, right? Kind of like an Army Navy college of what a person could do in a group, because as a group you have a lot better chance. So you have like a squad, or I kind of call it a posse. Um, and the best analog you can come up with is like grizzly bear or polar bear hunting. So this is kind of based off that. And I have been myself, but I mean, there's plenty of documentaries. There's hunters out there that have tagged them. We can backtrack and piggyback on that to find out more specifics, and that's a good analog. Um, Mentioning grizzlies, I mean, they're like 8 to 14 feet tall. I mean, 800 to 1,200 pounds. I mean, these are enormous beasts. They take up most of a regular room, like a huge animal. And no one's just going to go willy-nilly and, hunt them down. Even, I think, most hunters have guides, or a few of them, just in case. And so I'm going to try to break this down by category, if this makes sense. And the advantage of bears is they can sprint or rush at a quick speed, but not very long. They're charging you, you're probably SOL. If you have like a 500 Smith & Wesson or something like that, or a 4 for Magnum Minimal, you might do some damage, but you gotta think they have large skeletal structure, so they have a very thick skull and bones, and they're probably full of adrenaline, so they're not gonna feel shit. I mean, you might shoot them through the eye or whatever, and maybe get lucky, the heart, lung, maybe they'll drop. It's not impossible, but it's just highly unlikely. So section 1 is kind of like know your adversary, right? I know people play chess. I suck at it, but the game theory is the same. So the cryptids, generally, I'm going to use that term, prefer the backwoods, access to water, game, shelter, cover, and concealment, and opportunity. Secondly, that's like a generalization. Specifically, you need to know more information. What is the size of their general home area? Are there a bunch of trails leading into and out of it? They could be, game trails, deer trails, normal walking trails, fire trails, something like that. And how you're going to get the size of it. Some meters like generations of hand-me-down information, and you can get a general idea of their home range. Approximately how many people live next to the home range? Because you have to consider the retaliation upon them. They're intelligent animals, but they're not logical in the sense that they have information like we do. They don't have access to vast amounts of information. Definitely highly intelligent, it seems to be. And I hope I never meet these things ever. But it's better to think this out rather than not. What kind of prey species are nearby? Deer, anything they prey on. Moose, elk, any other animal. What kinds are they? What type are they? Approximately how many are they? Usually like a Department of Wildlife Resources, I'd imagine would probably hold statistics on if they're above average, below average, or whatever, as far as population density. So you should be able to look that up really easily. And if they're sharply declining, I mean, that could be disease, it could be poaching, it could be overhunting. But being able to assume on the side of error, and that might be a cryptid activity as well. How aggressive are they? Well, it seems to all the different stories they're very aggressive, even hyper aggressive. Which is just looking at the stories. You might shoot one as an individual, and I think there was one case, and they shot him with like a 40 caliber in the chest. Didn't do nothing, but it stalked him back for like a mile. And this guy luckily was able to make it out there. We have to look around for that story online. I forget what channel covered that. What kind of schedule do they run? Are they diurnal, meaning daytime running, or nocturnal, nighttime running? Or they may be a combination of both, like people. One may be more prevalent than the other, and that could be an advantage or disadvantage. It just depends. Very few of us can afford night vision and FLIR, because it's a very expensive technology. But those that can, it's definitely a force multiplier. Once you evaluate some of these basics, you start to get an image or an idea of what they can do and their capabilities, more or less. But you need to develop a large network or group that can support you financially, technologically, just resource-wise. Competency is a huge factor. Courage, of course. But you need people that ultimately are reliable, emotionally stable. Sidearm. I was looking at some of the stuff like, let's say, like out of bears, like a 500 Smith & Wesson, a minimal 44 Magnum, things like that. Big ass revolvers. But the ability to repeat shots consistently can vary a lot. I would say actually probably the best sidearm might be a shotgun, and like triple-aught buck or something like that as a weapon of last resort. My preference for a primary weapon, honestly, I did some looking into research into this, is probably a 458 SOCOM. You can buy a 458 SOCOM from Radical Firearms for about $600. It's an upper that fits on an AR platform. You just take off your regular upper, and you put this one on, and it includes the barrel and gas system and basics that you need. You have to get, sights or whatever, of course, but I mean, you can, for less than $1,000, you can get that done. And if you use 30 round magazines, you can get about 11 rounds. If you use a 40 round magazine, you can get about 13. And that's essentially the equivalent of a 45-70, like lever action rifle. I mean, these things are, what, probably minimal. It's like 300 grain bullet, traveling at like almost 2,000 feet per second. That's, double the speed of a 45 pistol. And that's a lot of lead or whatever coming at you. I would probably suggest copper. It seems to be a better penetrator. And I've read a bunch of Steve Quayle and Tom Horn and stuff like that. And it seems the Rephaim, or descendants of the Nephilim. Let's get this straight. The Rephaim are the hybrids. The Nephilim are the Sasquatchers. But they seem to be, the giants can, however, if you believe the stories, are especially vulnerable to copper. And you can buy copper bullets. They're expensive, but how expensive is your life? Is your life worth it? This isn't something you want to do overnight. You want to build up. Knowledge is power. And speaking of knowledge and technology, I think it'd be a good idea to scout things out with drones, like quadcopters and stuff like that, and GoPros. And if you're able for like a forward-looking infrared or FLIR, it'd probably be a good idea to fly above the forest or into the forest. Depending on the range of the drone, it's a lot safer. And maybe you want to come in one way and exit out a completely different way so they can't track it. That's a lot safer than people going in and thinking they're like, the last Indian or whatever. Also, secondary weapons. I think the Lockett story, they had like bear traps, things like that, specially designed ones. They seem to make a lot of difference in sense. However, the cryptids were intelligent enough to start picking up a pattern and discover these devices and dismantle or do away with them. So it might be a one-trick pony, but if you're able to set this up in time, it might be very efficient. This is going to be a lengthy video. I also think that this posse, like I said, probably minimal of at least probably 40 people. Actually, probably more. Think platoon size, like 80. Now, it's hard to get people together to get to a conference or, meet over a beer over just random, conversation. But this is what's going to be required. And assume for every one that you see, there's probably 4 more that you don't. I think it's a good rule of thumb. I would like to call these entities the military, and it has the right resources and tech. Probably special military divisions. I don't know what they're actually called, but I'm gonna call them SMDs. And are set up. I mean, they are the forefront. I mean, they're like Delta. They're like Rangers, Force Recon. These dudes, they go in and blast these things, right? And that's a good thing. But it seems to do like on an as needed basis, maybe. And obviously, there's more going on that we don't have access to. This isn't a conspiracy, really, as much as just controlled information, which is like a standard tactic. There's a lot of common sense behind it. I don't think it's necessarily nefarious. But they have the hardware, and we don't. So we have to think, what do we have access to? And these attacks are literally in people's backyard, literally, sometimes. And we don't have the option to not do anything. Except for, I would say, appease them if you don't have the right resources built up. And do whatever you can to either move or stay the hell out of their way. That's it. These are your only options. The Lockett story assumed that there's about 12 to 30-ish loopings that besieged property. This was in 48. They had, I want to say, some success, but that's kind of heavily weighted. And they eventually fell back and lost. From my understanding, Taylor, Mississippi has a lot of like craziness, which is in that general area. So that's just one location. Are there other locations like this or have that potential? I'd assume that these numbers are going to grow. If they were shrink, you'd have less occurrences and less sightings. So it could be just more people have access to media, cameras, more people in one area, and that could increase sightings, or I'd assume the worst, that the population density is going up. Also, if you're a biblical person or not, but in the Bible, it says like there's like beasts that'll be coming in Revelations, and they'll be unleashed, and the restrictions will be off. I'm paraphrasing a lot. But can you imagine if it were to happen on a nationwide scale? Imagine, if you will, that something happens in a country, I don't know, EMP, economic collapse, the usual shit hits the fan stuff, right? So your protected infrastructure has been damaged, and who knows how long before it comes back if it does. So the access to forest services, police, National Guard, things of that nature, even maybe these special squads, will be diminished, if not zero. It's up to you. Now, assuming you have any kind of forward-thinking ability and common sense, you want to get a network together somehow of what you can do, and get some people together. Now, a lot of you live in rural areas, and it may be hard to get people, but how valuable is your life? And also, most people that are into these videos, it might be entertainment, it might be like an actual interest, but the people that survive in the long run are people that are capable of critical thinking and thinking outside the box. So this is just a mental exercise. Don't recommend that you guys do this as of yet. We need to do a lot more research and intelligence gathering. So I was thinking, as far as the 4570 rifle, it holds force rounds. Might be exceptions to this. It's carbine lever action. It's relatively reliable, but I'd say it's less effective than a semi-auto AR platform. 458 SOCOM or 50 Beowulf or 450 caliber. There should, like I said, there should be a network to protect ourselves from the super aggressive cryptids. And as a population grids, we approach upon these animals' domains, or cryptids' domains. And I'm not trying to be like an environmental nut or anything like that, but one society expands, another contracts until there's conflict. I mean, that's just regular human history. Look at the Romans and the Gauls. We gotta anticipate this gap. Prepare ahead of time. That's our ability. We're intelligent and we're tech savvy. And we can think in multiple variations as humans. So we need to use that to advantage. In regards to the ammo types, I saw they had like a comparison of AR-15 and AR-10, 5.56 versus 308 respectively, and those aren't enough. A 308 is good for like medium-sized game. People like that's not an issue obviously because they're battle rifles, but yeah, you'd think of the much heavier caliber, and that's the only way to go. Even with a 458 SOCOM, you're lucky if you get about 175 as either meters or yards. You might be able to rainbow it a little more, but I think I saw a video of a guy using a 458 SOCOM took down a deer at about 412 to 450 yards, but I mean, it went like a rainbow. It did drop it, and it was suppressed. It killed it. So it's not saying he can't do it. It's just this guy had the tech to help him, like on a tripod. It was a rangefinder, so that helped him immensely. This like the AK 7.62 by 39. Forget it. Maybe it's a weapon of last resort, possibly. And maybe you'd use AP and hollow points. You probably want designated mags for each. You don't want to mix them up. Just in case you have a failure to feed and something's trying to eat you. It's horrible. Also, there's been sightings in major cities like Chicago, New Orleans, other cities across the United States where these things have been spotted. So it's not just a rural phenomenon. It's something that occurs across the country. And I don't know if they're increasing because these things are scouts, or they just are in the area and looking around or curious, or both. And the strange thing is their intelligence. They can burrow, they can climb, move doorknobs, ram walls, all kinds of stuff. And they're actually kind of similar. I put an analogy also to like a super carnivorous raccoon. And imagine if the raccoon was a wolf and wanted to eat you and your family and everyone around you. Terrifying. You can't live in fear, though. The best cure to fear is logic and to prepare. You minimize fear. You're going to feel it. I'm absolutely sure. But we want to minimize it. It's kind of like the saying, you sweat and practice, is less you bleed more. Same concept. Now, they have communication. Yelps, howls, growls, and maybe infrasound. That's up for debate. But assume they can communicate relatively effectively. That's something to consider also. The most important thing is intelligence has to be gathered. You have to map out everything that we can. As many variables. We got to cut this down. Roughly they're 7 to 12 feet tall. If I put like a weight guesstimate, 350 to maybe 1,000 pounds or more, depending on their size. Credible trackers can track from many, many miles away, from what I understand. They hold grudges. They remember. That's terrifying. They will come back if they're wronged. Are ultra dominant. I mean, these things get shot and pursue. That's not normal behavior. Great hearing, assume their nighttime vision, right? Teeth seem to be designed to hold a victim. Have the large canines and incisors up front, and then hooked back molars, from what I understand from stories. And that's definitely a snatching mechanism. Think of like an alligator. And that's to hold you down while their pack probably tears you apart and eat you alive, I would imagine. Because wolves eat their prey alive. So I mean, that's terrifying and horrible. So we want to assume the worst, right? Now they tend to get off like a lot of senses. People can pick it up, like anxiety, fear, things like that. So I don't know if it's like infrasound or they're mentally projecting, which I think is least likely. But I won't discount that either. I mean, it's just such an overwhelming animal. Triggers our latent primal senses to the extreme because it's such an anomaly. That could be the case. Typically smell of urine, blood, fecal matter, and just general nastiness. So that's probably when they're really close. Also keep in mind wind tracking. If you're down with them, downwind, they're going to smell you from way far away. So the best bet is to get upwind of them if possible. And wind patterns change. They're not consistent. I'm not a hunter, but I listen to hunters. And I'm from the Midwest. I live near lots of fields. And there's a lot of hunters right here. So they're more experienced than I am. And I'd be stupid not to listen to them. Let's see. They seem to have like 3-inch long canines, varying to 1 inch throughout their molars and incisors and their jawline. So that's essentially your finger. That's a tooth, and that's a lot of damage. That's a lot of tearing. I mean, if you get a wound from these things, you're probably gonna bleed out and die, I would think, if you don't get like proper med kit to help. Also, they have hooked molars, which seem to hold you in, as I mentioned previously. Approximately 6-inch claws on the hands, probably shorter on feet because as you're tracking and moving, they rub down like a dog. They're able to travel on 2 legs or 4 legs. Their hips pop, spinal column pops to realign for maximum movement mode. So they are at least semi-biological, and they're probably supernatural too. I don't discount a whole lot. We have to assume the worst. Jumping is incredibly important. They seem to be jump like 40 feet with no problem, so they'll probably jump further. Imagine if something's running very fast, which is they seem to do, 50, 60 miles per hour from some accounts, and then they jump on top of that. They're leaping like crazy, probably over rivers very easily, except maybe the Mississippi, maybe. So they're great ambush predators. They'll more likely be waiting on you before you see them ever. 9 times out of 10, I would think. Also, they can jump roughly, it seems like, for about 10 feet just from a standing position, straight up. I would assume actually higher than that. So, if you have structure, probably need a couple stories, several stories. Don't assume you're safe just because you live in a multi-story building. Lock and wrench are something really good. They reinforce their supports. Ultimately, they got dug out and burrowed, and this critter ran into the wall and was buckling it, and the guy finally scared him off. But things to learn. So they can climb on roofs, they cause noise, intimidation factor. I think they put oil and stuff on the roofs, they'd fall off, and that's a good idea. And they put traps underneath them to clamp on them. Great idea. But no one lives in like a vault. So we have houses that are drywall. If you're lucky, you might have brick or cinder. But these things are immensely strong. So before you go pick fights, realize you live in a home that if you're lucky, extremely lucky, and God's watching you somehow, you may survive the night. If you do, get the fuck out of there. Biggest problem is most people don't think as far as like outside thinking, they have a hard time realizing that government encroachment is a real thing, which is why we have the Second Amendment. Now, this is like ratcheted up to 11, talking about cryptids and things like that. It's highly unusual, but not without cause. So, most people aren't going to follow this. You're going to think you're nuts or extremist or preparing for like something anti-government or something like that, and that's just stupid. So, be careful. Don't be an idiot about stuff. If you know someone's an idiot, they want to help, just get away from them. They're going to make things so much worse. You have to use maturity and emotional maturity too. And so those people, like the ones that can't even imagine thinking outside the box, worst case scenario, national collapse, they're going to be food. That's it. There's going to be massive panic, and that's going to exasperate things so much worse. And along those lines, imagine a mass exodus of people leaving the cities to go into the woods. Guess what? These things are going to do. They're going to retaliate. Not only against the invading parties, but counter to that. They're going to go past that confrontation, maybe into the cities themselves. Terrifying? Unlikely? Yes. Impossible? No. We have to assume the worst. Yeah, so they may counterattack in a complete overwhelming manner. So that's why we need a network of intelligence and other stuff just to get ready. Obviously, we should be able to take care of ourselves without relying on governmental agencies because they can be corrupted, co-opted, and exasperated. So can we, but it's better to have a crappy failsafe than none. If nothing happens, hey, we're fine. It's not a big deal, and I've just wasted some time, but nothing too significant. Plus, on top of this, you have like your regular human gangs like Antifa, MS-13, Militant, Black Lives Matter, jihadis. All these kind of guys are actually real threats or normal that at least some people are considering of, let alone cryptids. But it's a multi-layered system here. You have people with vast amounts of power undermining the country and individuals and liberties at the very top, and kind of like the sleeper cell of these cryptids underneath. There's a whole bunch of stuff in this layer cake leading up. So we have a lot cut out for us. If it seems like I'm ranting, I'm not. This is all like thought out. And just try to follow my thinking. And if you can't, I'm sure you can. Anyways, I got a little sidetrack there. If anyone's seen the movie Pacific Rim, it's about these giant robots that fight these giant, they call them kaiju, but they're monsters, like Godzilla type things, right? Now replace the giant monsters with cryptids, and replace the giant robots with 458 SOCOMs. Basically, the movie is these things invade, they're transdimensional, humanity is on a perilous edge, and it's up to individuals who network and gather in groups with resources to fight them off, and they win, and they do. So just think about that. It's a good analogy, good metaphor. And also to get like an idea of their going back to their territory and where they roam, we have resources we can use: Google Maps, forestry maps. Like I said, a drone with infrared cameras would be great. There's all kinds of apps and stuff and GPS things that we can use. Tracking patterns we can use to see if animals are being depleted in the area or not. Something I definitely want to note: human scouts. They should be like last resort, and they should definitely be used some kind of tech like a drone. You don't need people going in and trying to find their hidey holes and stuff, because that could seriously backfire. But ultimately, you will have to have some kind of human intelligence on the ground to report back information. So communications is a big thing. So I had an idea, which was, use a radio broadcast, but as you guys live in rural areas know, it's hard to get a signal valleys and gorges and all this kind of thing. So I don't know if this exists or not, but I'm sure it does. You can send up like a balloon with a relay or transmitter to boost the signal, then that would be extremely useful. Intelligence will keep us alive. Excuse me. Tracking movement, things of that nature. The military's got a great idea with drones and missiles, so they can just like launch them into their little dens or whatever. We don't have that ability at all. And we have to think within our means too. We can't get too fantastical about equipment and stuff like that. But there's people that are backwoods engineers, I call them, and they're very ingenious. And we should be able to come up with something that's usable. And again, I'm only talking about cryptids. I'm not talking overthrowing nothing, right? So just cryptids. Also get to know animal psychology, like bears and wolves are a good example. So we have to assume that this transfers to them to some extent, especially the worst behavioral incidents. And like for instance, the bluff charges. You know, they bluff, they scare people and tap on windows and that kind of thing, and you submit. And that's probably actually a good thing for us because hopefully they'll leave us alone or bypass us. This is not a guarantee though, and that's something to keep in mind. That just because they do that doesn't mean that we're gonna get away scot-free. This is again why you need to prepare. And it's not reliable. So also strange enough, why do they hang around cemeteries and things of that nature, burial mounds? Well, there's two reasons I can think of. And one's supernatural, one's more biological natural. So supernaturally, they could be like ethereal, interdimensional energy, something like that. Spirits and banshee type stuff, weird paranormal stuff like that, which I believe in for the most part. I think if it's hypothetically possible, then I'm willing to think about it. And so that could be one thing. Maybe like to scare ghosts. I don't know. On the biological sense, humans not too often are in cemeteries, especially rural areas. Every once in a while a person will come, and there's usually a long... I actually worked for a burial vault company at one time, and we get there with a big truck, and the whole be there. The grave digger would already be there, and you lower the vault in, do your job, get done, funeral services held, then you cover it up. Well, the grave digger covers it up. You drop it in there and you take off, all within a few hours. So that's a lot of personal activity they suspect. So they're intelligent enough to watch and observe. That's especially scary. But biologically, I think it's just more or less we're not there that often. It's kind of like a clearing, or it might be a good like moot or gathering area, and something of that nature. There's probably more to it than that, but that's just what I'm thinking of right now. And then I heard that story.